Shalom, shalom, beautiful friends. It's great to see you. And it was great to see Steve and Janie and Ken volunteering yesterday. Of course, Lauren, we didn't expect you to come down from Canada. And David, not sure if you're up north or south right now, but it is great to be with you all and to think today about the psychology of ethnocentrism, the psychology of ethnocentrism. So let's start with a little text to discuss before we go into that. Okay, this comes from Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. Ki am kadosh ata la'Adonai Elohecha, bachru Adonai Elohecha, liyot lo la'am segula mikol ha'amim asher al pnei ha'adama. For you are a people consecrated to your God. All the peoples on earth, your God chose you to be God's treasured people. Okay, curious to hear your thoughts on this notion of chosenness or treasuredness. What's your own perspective on the notion of chosenness?
Chosenness is a responsibility, and it doesn't mention the triple covenant, but the triple covenant is the people, the land, and Hashem, and the people have to be consecrated to Hashem. So in other words, it means following Torah and living in a Torah way in order to keep the land. When they failed, they lost the land. But its chosenness is not like you're better than anybody else. Consecrated to God means you have to follow God's ways. And that's what you're chosen to do. It's a large responsibility.
Great. So for Lauren, this doesn't mean superiority. It means increased sense of responsibility. Great. Steve, did you unmute?
Yes, thank you. I understand that, and I understand responsibility, and I think all of us think like that. But why in the world was the word chosen put in there? It kind of throws me off balance, and I don't know how to address it. I know what Lauren just said, and I understand that, but I wish if that was what we wanted, chosen would not have been in the script at all.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Steve. Good. We're going to come back to that point. Last comment here. Ken, did I see you unmuted also? No, you didn't. Okay, good. So, all right. So here we go. So friends, today we're talking about the topic of ethnocentrism. We will briefly talk about two foundational researchers into ethnocentrism from sociological and psychological perspectives. Then we're going to discuss some contemporary work on the topic and use a definition from that body of research, which identifies a number of component parts of ethnocentrism as an entryway for looking at some Jewish texts and traditions that relate to this theme. Ludwig Gomplowitz. I bet you wish that was your name when you were born. Come here for breakfast, Ludwig Gomplowitz. It's not fair to make fun of the guy's name. Yeah, come on. My name is Shmuly Yanklowitz. What do I have on this guy? Anyways, Ludwig Gomplowitz was born in 1839 in the Jewish quarter of Krakow. He lived through a time of changing notions of group and personal identities, such as the emergence of the ideas of nationalism in that area of the world. During his life, his hometown of Krakow went through different levels of independent sovereignty and control by Poland, Russia, and the Austrian Empire. And he and his family were involved in nationalist movements in various ways at different times. They were also active in fighting for legal rights for Jews and encouraging Jews to assimilate. Gumplowitz converted to Christianity as his academic career in law and the nascent field of sociology advanced in Austria. Out of all this experience, we can assume grew Gumplowitz's interest in understanding humans through their affiliation with groups, and he is considered one of the founders of the field of sociology. Did you ever hear Gumplowitz? In his view, humanity should be understood best through group interactions, in particular through group conflict. Ethnocentrism was for him both pervasive in humanity and a fallacy akin to geocentrism. Here's what he wrote. Just as he regards himself as the center of the earth, anthropocentrism, as he regards the earth as the center of the universe, geocentrism, every people and every nation regards itself as the most splendid, ethnocentrism. So he links anthropocentrism, geocentrism, and ethnocentrism. He did not seem to believe that ethnocentrism would ever be overcome. Rather, it was for him a fundamental part of human psychology. And yet, paradoxically, within the academic milieu, he criticized his colleagues for displaying ethnocentric biases and advocated for objective research free of ethnocentrism, believing it to be possible. About a century later, Henry Tajfel was another Polish Jewish intellectual who contributed to the study of ethnocentrism. Tajfel survived the Holocaust as a prisoner of war after serving in the French army. We've discussed in an earlier session how Stanley Milgram was motivated by the Holocaust to try to understand the natural psychology behind the impulse to obey authority that proved so catastrophically evil among the masses of Nazi Germans. Similarly, Tajfel was motivated by his own terrible experience of the Holocaust to research the psychology of prejudice. Also, like Milgram, Tajfel concluded that there was nothing unique in the underlying psychology of the Nazis. Among his experimental techniques was what is known as the minimal group paradigm, by which experimental subjects are placed in arbitrary, meaningless groups based on unimportant details of who they are, or even based on a coin flip. And merely because they had been told they were part of a particular group, they would exhibit preference for their fellow group mates over members of other groups. The theory he developed is known as social identity theory, which argues that people's very identity and self-perception is a function of the various overlapping groups of people they belong to. By the way, my brother is mad and crying and screaming that the Chicago Bears lose in the playoffs a few days ago. I also grew up in Chicago, didn't even know they lost, didn't even care. And so, is that because he stayed in Chicago and I left Chicago? Okay. As the Zulu proverb says, Ubuntu negumuntu negumbantu. Okay, sorry for botching that. A person is a person through people. That's what the Zulu proverb is saying. A person is a person through people. Therefore, preference for or centering of one's own groups, in contrast to other groups, which can manifest as prejudice or intergroup conflict, arises from a desire to see oneself in a positive way. I would claim that Tajfel, by doing this work, was able to see the positive reasons behind the atrocities he himself experienced at the hand of other humans. And by finding the seed of that cruelty in something both positive and latent in all of us, even himself, he included himself in his persecutors in one single group, yet still was able to see himself in a positive way. Tajfel's social identity theory has become influential in many different areas of psychology. While it was motivated by a desire to understand ethnocentrism, it ended up serving more generally to guide research, theory, and therapy in identity and relationship with the self, with others, and with society. But let's refocus our own discussion back onto the question of ethnocentrism. Boris Bizumik, a contemporary Australian researcher, has made it a mission to energize and clarify the study of ethnocentrism within the fields of political and social psychology. In a 2021 paper with colleagues Connell Monaghan and Daniel Priest called The Return of Ethnocentrism, he explains how the term fell out of favor in the field. Quote, psychologists want to develop universal theories, and those who study intergroup relations often want to develop theories that apply to all groups, such as two-person groups, small project teams, tribes, ideological groups, and large-scale groups. So researchers, as we have seen perhaps with Tajfel, see ethnocentrism as just an example of what must surely be a more fundamental psychological phenomenon having to do with differentiating between your group and outside your group for any type of group. Bismarck and folks argue that many psychologists not only see ethnocentrism as too specific a phenomenon to study, they also seem to believe that it is too transient. They write, quote, it appears that many social scientists believed that the new world we are entering would bring about a new, more diverse, globalized, international, and tolerant stage. Many have been influenced by the liberal ideas of human progress. A number of authors have written about a post-ethnic world. These and similar ideas have had to appeal to many social scientists with specific ideologies who believe that humans would unite into a common identity and transcend old differences, principally those that relate to ethnicity and nationality. Accordingly, many social scientists have assumed that the concept of ethnocentrism, which is tied to the concept of ethnicity, as the term ethnos indicates, does not require a special treatment on its own, denoting a phenomenon that would disappear over time. But Bismarck and his colleagues argue that this belief, for better or worse, is a mistaken one. And in reality, ethnicity and ethnocentrism are both widespread and durable within the human psyche. One of the ways they argue this point is by showing that even the idea that ethnicity and ethnocentrism are imminently disappearing is itself very old. Okay, you have this quote on the screen if you want to read it, but I'm going to skip over this for the moment. Whenever people have decided that ethnocentrism will become a thing of the past, it has proven to outlast them. Indeed, the researchers explain that while the late 20th and early 21st centuries saw a shift of focus in social and political psychology away from ethnocentrism, the current rise of, remember Dreaming of a World Without Borders, Dreaming of a World Without Religion, you're aware of the song. We want to get rid of these differences and boundaries and barriers. They saw a shift of focus in social and political psychology away from ethnicism and centrism. The current rise of far-right populism internationally has led to renewed interest in the phenomenon, as exemplified by their own research, among others. In order to unify the field around a common language and develop measurement tools, these Australian psychologists propose a definition of ethnocentrism as an individual level and multidimensional attitudinal construct consisting of 6 specific dimensions which have a specific subject matter, a strong preoccupation with the importance of one's own ethnic group. They're describing how ethnocentrism manifests within an individual psychology, and they're breaking it apart into 6 different psychological tendencies, which are related but neither equivalent nor completely correlated with each other. I want to use their 6 dimensions to discuss how ethnocentrism is both enshrined and resisted in Jewish tradition. For each of their 6 attributes, I'm going to offer a few Jewish perspectives, teachings or traditions or ideas, and I'll try to give a variety of angles, some that demonstrate or encourage ethnocentrism, as well as others that oppose it. They describe their first 2 dimensions as intragroup ethnocentrism, i.e., how someone views their own ethnic group. The last 4 are intergroup ethnocentrism, which include a person's perspective on outsiders, members of other groups. The 6 dimensions are devotion, group cohesion, preference, superiority, purity, and exploitativeness. The first dimension, devotion, is defined as an attitude in favor of strong, passionate, and ardent commitment to one's own ethnic group. Ethnocentric people are seen as being highly devoted and committed to their ethnic group and ready to sacrifice their time, energy, and even life for the sake of the group. Think of dying for your country, right? Think of dying for your people. Think of your opposition to racism being most akin to your a particular race. On the side of pro-devotion, we have an ancient Midrash on the verse in Jeremiah. Quote, Israel are scattered sheep, it says. A verse which on its face talks of a time when the people of Israel are helpless because we are disconnected from each other. The Midrash, though, inverts the meaning of the verse and interprets it as likening the people of Israel to a single sheep. If a sheep is injured in one part of its body, observes the Midrash, the whole sheep feels the pain. So too Israel, as we all suffer the pain of each one of us. The Midrash goes on to describe this unity as a special Jewish trait, saying that Gentiles are not so, right? A Gentile will not just be more sad seeing another Gentile, right? But if you hear somebody in China was killed by a car accident, you don't necessarily feel, uniquely attached to that person who died of this car accident. But if a Jew in America hears of a Jew who died of a car accident in China, they might feel something around that. Rather, they delight in one another's. Some will even delight to some degree in seeing the pain of another, thinking that that's not them. This is perhaps an expression of some form of ethnocentric superiority as well. We're not only devoted to our group, the Midrash says, but we're uniquely devoted to our group, and no other ethnic group has internal devotion in that way. However large our population, we feel the commitment and devotion of a single extended family. On the other hand, we do have some sources also that express similar devotion and integration, but with the entire world, not only to a people. Rabbi Kook, a spiritual father of the religious Zionist movement, who did discuss the special nature of the people of Israel and the importance of maintaining its unity, also wrote beautifully of the unity of all creation, human, animal, vegetable, and mineral. A person stands and wonders what need there is for all the many happenings and anomalous, multitudinous creations, and they do not understand how everything is one single giant unit. He's a monist, by and large. The dormant life of the inanimate is the beginning of the flash that proceeds to illuminate within the plant life, splits into millions of lines, distinct and diverse, arrive to the sanctified place of life, where they already sparkle exultantly, proceed and rise to the heights of the crown of the creations of the world, the human whose entire living essence is the streams of the light, and the persistent progression of whose soul rising aloft, these indeed are nothing but the large waves of the soul, which travel to and fro through the strength of all the movements of life in existence, from the tiniest beginnings of life to their greatness from the inanimate of the speaking. So Rav Kook, who's like one of the great enemies of the progressive, world, the Israeli settler. The Israeli settler is like the worst of the worst, right? This is like a colonialist, right? But Rav Kook is their teacher. Rav Kook is the central ideologue and the founder of religious Zionism and modernity. And yet, if you look more deeply in his thought, he's not promoting what many of them might suspect. He really is dealing with animals and the universe and all humans in this interconnected whole. Perhaps there is room to say that it is not only the Jewish community that has such devotion to one another as to be only as far apart as different limbs of a single sheep. Perhaps, as Rav Kook expresses, the entire world of God's creation is a single organism with no possibility of division, much less ethnic division among groups of humans. Now, the second dimension of ethnocentrism proposed by Bezumik, Monahan, and Priest is group cohesion. Defined as an attitude in favor of ethnic group unity at the expense of individual freedoms, ethnocentric people highly value a strong sense of cohesiveness within the ethnic group, want all group members to think and behave as one, and reject individual freedoms and disagreements between group members. By the way, look at political parties. If you don't vote with your party as a senator, right? They need your vote, and you're going to be the one outlier as a Democrat or as a Republican. or you're going to speak out against your religious denomination, that your denomination's leadership is going astray, or speak out against your nation's foreign policy. Of course, this plays out in every group. Here we really feel. I just think about Jews who have been Jewish queer people who have been alienated from queer movements because they're Zionists. Many examples like this. Here we really feel the pull in both directions in Jewish tradition. On the one hand, we have the system of halakha, Jewish law that dictates all aspects of life, and the gravity of the threat faced by transgressors of norms that they be utterly cut off from their community, either in a spiritual sense, through the punishment of karet, or in a practical way through cherem, excommunication. It seems that there really is a strong value placed in sacrificing individual freedom for the sake of group cohesiveness and tradition. On the other hand, two Jews, three opinions. What do you mean rejecting disagreements between group members? We love disagreements between group members. The tension is captured in a single Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. It says, every machloket, every dispute that is for the sake of heaven will in the end endure, but one that is not for the sake of heaven will not endure. Truly, group cohesion, as they define it, is simultaneously a deeply held Jewish value and also utterly anathema to traditional Judaism. The researchers describe the third dimension of ethnocentrism as follows. Preference is defined as an attitude in favor of preferring and liking one's own ethnic group and its members over outgroups. Ethnocentric people show explicit and implicit preferences and liking for their ethnic group, including its characteristics, values, norms, as well as individual group members over any other ethnic group, as well as their characteristics, values, norms, and individual group members. By the way, this is not a class on ethics. This is a class on psychology. And so I'm not saying ethnocentrism is bad. I'm saying it's fundamental to human psychology. I just want to remind us of that. Is the famous beloved commandment from Leviticus, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, which Rabbi Akiva calls a central tenet of the Torah, ethnocentric, or is it anti-ethnocentric? What do you think? Maimonides interprets the commandment as referring specifically to loving or acting in a loving way to fellow Jews, not to non-Jews, right? There's moral obligations to non-Jews, right? But love in this verse is specifically for Jews. When it says love the stranger, there it's dealing with loving Gentiles, right? But this verse is uniquely to Jews. Now I know Jews that struggle with each one. I know Jews that say, love the stranger. Like that actually means converts. That can't actually mean non-Jews, right? And then I know people who struggle with love your fellow Jew. Why would I love someone because they're Jewish? It makes no sense to me. This interpretation does make sense as a straightforward reading of the verse, given that the full verse reads, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. Love your neighbor as yourself, I'm God. However, 19th century Italian commentator Elijah Benamojig, right? Or was he a part of your Sunday school learning? When you went to Sunday school, did they teach you about the Italian commentator Elijah Benamojig? Comes to the opposite conclusion about the verse, pointing out that the word your neighbor is used instead of member of your people, in particular to make that distinction and prove that it's a commandment to love all people, not only Jews. Okay, dimension number 4. I know I'm rushing through these, but I want to keep moving along. Dimension number 4 is superiority, defined as an attitude in favor of the belief that one's own ethnic group is superior to and objectively better than any other ethnic group. Ethnocentric people tend to believe that when it comes to the most important group attributes, which differ among ethnic groups, historical achievements, competence, morality, military strength, their ethnic group is superior to all others. So, is it a Jewish value to see the greatness of other Jews in comparison to other groups? Many Jews certainly proudly discuss such things as the number of Jews who've won Nobel Prizes. By the way, I know somebody recently who did not win a Nobel Prize. Not sure if you, oh. Okay, by the way, I'm now accepting by mail any of your prizes you want to pass along to me. If you've won any prizes recently, I will take them in mail and receive them and put them on my wall and put my name over your name. Okay, we're getting a little too far afield here. Okay. I know many Jews proudly discuss such things as the number of Jews who have won Nobel Prizes and remarkable Jewish contributions to different industries, arts, culture, sciences, engineering, and other fields. We publish books anthologizing many biographies of great Jewish men and great Jewish women. Also, the notion of the Jewish people as a chosen people, as we discussed, unique and selected by God, is deep within the tradition. We read in Deuteronomy, quote, "For you are a people consecrated to God," as we discussed, Am Segula. On the other hand, throughout the Tanakh, we find statements by God criticizing the Jews uniquely as unworthy, even in comparison to other peoples. And the prophet Amos denies our uniqueness before God and says, "To me, O Israelites, you are just like the Cushites," declares God. And continues regarding our great national narrative of God liberating us from Egypt. "True, I brought Israel up from the land of Egypt, but also the Philistines from Kaftor and the Arameans from Kir," right? Who you think you're special? Right? God brought lots of people up. Apparently, we're not the only people from whom God has liberated in that way. To steep ourselves in Jewish tradition is to remind ourselves both that we as Jews have a distinct role and relationship with the divine on the one hand, and on the other hand, we're a disappointment and a frustration for God and are utterly unworthy, right? In fact, many children feel this way, loved by their parents, but not fully loved by their parent, chosen by their parents, but abandoned by their parents, right? A success to their parents, but also a failure to their parents, right? On the general topic of one ethnicity being greater than another, the Mishnah teaches that the reason humanity was created, beginning only with a single human, is, quote, "for the sake of peace among humankind, that one should not say to another." By the way, I always wonder, was Adam doing ab exercises in the Garden of Eden? Because how come all this art of Adam and Eve have six packs? Like, what's going on with these guys? I mean, they were, what are they doing in the garden? If I was in the Garden of Eden, I'm having a great time. I'm not doing ab exercises. Quote, "My father," like, one should not say to another, "My father was greater than your father." We are all descended from the same parents. No group can claim any inherited genetic superiority. This directly contradicts something that our old friend, remember our good friend Ludwig Gumplowitz? Our old friend Ludwig Gumplowitz wrote to describe the universality of ethnocentrism. He wrote, "The biblical saga, and similarly the sagas of other peoples, invented the first couple created by God only for the reason to portray their own people always as the direct descendants of this first couple, as those whom God expressly called into life, in this way as masters of the creation." So Gumplowitz, who left Judaism, wanted to give a little shtuch to the Jews. He said those Jews invented this whole story just so they could be ethnocentrists, right? He was angry at the Jews that he had left. The Mishnah completely disagrees about the lesson of the creation story in the biblical saga. So now we have a great debate between the Mishnah and Gumplowitz for the fifth dimension of ethnocentrism. Okay? It says, purity is defined as an attitude in favor of ethnic in-groups purity and intolerance of ethnic diversity. Ethnocentric people tend to reject ethnic out-group members and tend to prefer not to mix much or at all with members of other ethnic groups towards whom they show heightened social distance, rejecting them as neighbors, co-workers, friends, romantic partners, and spouses. By the way, one of the continued raging debates in the Jewish community is about intermarriage. By the way, it's not just some denominations. Every denomination has different debates around this. Obviously, in Orthodoxy, it is totally opposed to intermarry. In conservative Judaism, rabbis are still not allowed to perform intermarriages. And then in some of the more liberal denominations, there's still debates. Okay, they can perform them, but can the rabbi themselves be intermarried? And what is this and that? But some of the Jewish laws are actually about creating social distances lest you come to intermarry, right? There ought to be social distance. If you want Judaism to survive, then Jews need to marry Jews and have Jewish kids, because if they marry other people, Judaism will be watered down and then Judaism will ultimately be lost. But some of that kind of bridges into certain conversations also around purity as well. Is there a purity of the Jewish line in a sense? Right? What does it mean to lose some of that purity? You see that among different faiths in different ways. In the Torah, God warns the people of Israel to avoid the corrupting influence of other peoples of the land where they're going to inhabit, saying, for example, here in Exodus, you must not make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, for they will lust after their gods and sacrifice to their gods and invite you, and you will eat of their sacrifices. Right? Why should you not eat with these people and become friends with these people? Because they're going to pull you into idolatry. And the rabbis made a number of legal decrees designed to limit contact between Jews and non-Jews. Rambam explains, quote, there are other substances which are forbidden by the sages. Right? Think about wine. There was a prohibition of Jews drinking alcohol with non-Jews. Because if you get drunk with them, you're going to sleep with them. If you get drunk with them, you're going to, absorb their ideas. Well, I mean, in a very different plane. One of the Nazi tactics, by the way, was in the beer halls of Germany. The beer halls of Germany were a very central place for getting people drunk and influencing ideology. So there is something to drunkenness and drinking in ideology, in who people sleep with, who people agree with politically. Even if we don't like the idea of not having a glass of wine with a Gentile, there's something still to think about. Who do I drink with and who do I not drink with? Rambam says there's other okay, we already said that. In the modern era, some communities, especially Haredi communities, these ultra-Orthodox communities, have increasingly isolated themselves from mixing and influence, while other portions of the Jewish world have increasingly integrated into general society. In the latter communities, much institutional energy has been put into addressing assimilation and as a part of the phenomenon intermarriage, as we discussed. All of these phenomena show a Jewish value in maintaining, in some sense, purity, especially to maintain cultural integrity and continuity as a perpetual minority population. But regarding ethnic purity, we can point to the countervailing requirement to welcome converts and accept them as full members of the Jewish community, right? Judaism would be racist if it said you're only a Jew if you're born into it, right? But because Judaism says, nope, it's not about birth, it's partially about birth, but anybody can join this, right? That moves it out of the category of racism. This inclusiveness and path to joining the community, as well as the ethnic and racial diversity within Judaism, are perhaps reasons why Rabbinic Judaism is not properly understood as an ethnicity as all, right? Judaism is not an ethnicity, right? It is something that one could choose to be a part of. The sixth and final dimension of ethnocentrism is exploitativeness, as defined as an attitude in favor of giving overwhelming importance to ethnic in-group interests over out-group interests, even when this leads to an impinging on the rights and feelings of ethnic outgroups. Ethnocentric people see their own ethnic group interest as most important, and they accept a variety of offensive behaviors such as lying to, exploiting, maltreating, abusing, and even killing outgroup members when it's in the ethnic group interest. By the way, a lot has shifted in Jewish mindset in the last 2.5 years. And one of the common things I hear more and more is people who tell me, I will not give a dime to any cause that's not Jewish. Post October 7th, we were completely abandoned as Jews. And if nobody stood with us, the only way I can ensure my people survive is to invest in my own people. I hear this over and over again, especially when I'm fundraising for universalistic causes that we might be a part of. This last quality of ethnocentrism is perhaps the most dangerous and the most uncomfortable to face. There certainly are contexts in which we exhibit a prioritizing of fellow Jews over other people. In recent times, those values have been associated with such phrases as Kol Yisrael Revim Zeh B'Zeh. All Israel is responsible for one another. However, looking at that phrase in its original context, it seems to refer to our liability for one another's transgressions, not safety. Right? We're responsible for each other's wrongdoings more than we are morally obligated. We are responsible for one another's behavior, and so we must offer our honest critique because we risk being punished as well as part of that group. It does not refer to our need to protect each other from being harmed, even at the expense of hurting members of our other groups. It refers to our need to protect each other from doing harm, from doing wrong, and therefore bringing guilt on the whole community. Okay, to move towards a conclusion here, the Talmud records a story about 2 officers sent from Rome to investigate the Jews. They spend time thoroughly learning and reviewing Torah from the sages. When it comes time for them to leave, they said to the sages, "We've examined your entire Torah, and it's true, except for this one matter. an ox of a Jew that gored the ox of a Gentile, the owner is exempt from liability. Whereas with regard to the ox of a Gentile that gored the ox of a Jew, the owner pays the full cost of the damage. They accept all they have learned from Jewish wisdom, but they object to this one Jewish law. The law is asymmetrical, the Romans said. A Gentile must pay for the damage their ox does to a Jew's ox. But if the Jew's ox does the same damage to the Gentile's ox, they do not need to pay. But the Romans do not object simply because it's unfair. Instead, they make an argument from the verse in the Torah on which the law is based, using the technical phraseology that you might see any rabbi in the Talmud make. We hear no response from their teachers, but the Romans assure them, we will not inform this matter to the kingdom. And there the story ends in the Talmud. Were the Romans right? The Talmud records their statement as the last word in the argument. So did the law change, become equal for all, Jew and Gentile alike, because of their reasoning? Or are we meant to be satisfied, like the Romans themselves, that though they have unveiled an inconsistent, exploitatively ethnocentric element in the Jewish beliefs, they see the overwhelming value in the overall system and they will not condemn it? Perhaps the Roman yeshiva students are like the psychology researchers. Looking to understand the system of the human mind, they come across the phenomenon of ethnocentrism. They can observe it and they can describe it. Perhaps they can justify it or revile it. They might try to change it, but they may not have that power. But now they are leaving their experimental subjects and going back to Rome. I wonder what they will now be able to notice when they reach their own home. Friends, this is the last thing I want to say on that point, is that there is something charitable to say about Jewish laws which have moral preferences for Jews as it relates to property in particular, which was that Jews were second-class citizens at best and were often stolen from and not protected among the societies they lived in. And so the idea, for example, that if you find a lost object of a fellow Jew, you must return it, but a debate around if you find the lost object of a Gentile, do you have to return it, was seen as a certain way of kind of recovering the significant amounts of damages that the community may have experienced. It's kind of hard for us in 21st century America, where we are so committed to equality under the law, to grapple with what it's like to live in a fundamentally unjust society and how you continue to survive among that. Okay, anyways, I'm going to pause there, and I'd love to open up thoughts and questions on the psychology of ethnocentrism. Yes, hi, Lauren.
Hi. One comment, but before I make that, my understanding is that, I mean, there's that story about the guy who found diamonds and or jewels of that, and he returned it because he wanted the Gentile to know that Jews are honest, and so I think that's still very much a part of how we look at things. I know I do. I mean, I had a case when somebody forgot to ring in a set of towels, and I actually went back and I told them, and I showed them, and the manager came over and she says, "Oh, that's so nice of you." And I said, "I'm an Orthodox Jew. It's just what we do." So anyways, but this Kol Yisrael Aravim Zev Zelazeh is really, I think, what kept us alive and what kept us going. And even the pain, I mean, I can't get over the Bebas boys. Every now and then I think of them and I just cry. This feeling of unity, this feeling of oneness, and it doesn't mean, I mean, my shul is blessed to have a few really righteous converts who didn't convert for marriage. They're women. It's going to be hard for them to get married, but they actually converted to Judaism because they believe in it, and they're as accepted as anyone else. But I really think that this is what keeps us alive and keeps us together. And you know, the Druzim, they don't even have conversion, and if they marry out, they're excommunicated. So if you think it's hard being an observant Jew, harder to be a Druze. Okay,
great. Lauren, thank you so much. So coming off MLK Day yesterday, I'm sure we are all committed to the fight for equality in the world, that we should live in more just societies that treat all people fairly, all people. And yet, I think it's clear, ought to be clear to us, but push back if it's not, if you disagree with me, that also what makes us human is to have moral preferences. I see nothing wrong with black men crying more when they see black men die than when they see Chinese men. I see nothing wrong with Jewish women wanting to give their charity primarily to Jewish women. I see nothing wrong with Ukrainians feeling most attached to the Ukrainian struggle as opposed to other struggles. I think that that's part of what makes us human, that we're a part of groups and we care more about our groups than other groups, even while we hold certain universal human rights. So, yeah, so thank you for that. And just to pick up on the story that Lauren started with, if you're not familiar with, Shimon ben Shetach bought a donkey from a Gentile, and his students found a diamond in the saddlebag. And Shimon insisted on returning this diamond, saying, I bought a donkey, not diamonds. And when they returned this diamond, the seller said, blessed is the God of Shimon ben Shetach. While many people would say, what do you mean? Look, this is a bad person who might have sold it to you. They're part of a group that wants to hurt you. You can get rich now. He said, no, the right thing still to do is to return that diamond. So thank you for reminding us of that. Yes, hi, Janie, and then Aglaya, and then Gary.
Yeah, hi. Of course, today was, I'm going to be thinking for weeks about this and not get any sleep. But when we're talking about centrism of any sort, I think it's antithetical to Judaism, and let me explain why. On Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in psychology, you don't stop at the first two levels. There is all this above. And I think centrism is in the same category. We're looking at anthropocentrism. Sure. Then you move to geocentrism. Then you move to ethnocentrism. But it's forgetting everything above that. And that to me is the essence of Judaism, everything that's above that. Because our responsibility is social responsibility, not Jewish responsibility. Our responsibility is to the world, to make the world and the earth better, not just our tribe. And I think that's what's meant by saying that the Jewish are the chosen people, because they already have gone beyond that. Jews are able to study their tribe themselves because it's part of the teachings. It's how you live as a Jew. That Jews are already able to study their tribe, their selves. And that's the purpose of ethnocentrism in a sense. It's learning about yourself to find out the skills that you can use to make the world better, to reach out to others, so that you are one with others, one with the world. And Buddha's often said, if you say us and them, it's the premise for violence, because it is already setting up the tension and the violence between two groups. So it takes us back to Judaism. I think that's the beauty of it. Yes, Jews are chosen because they go beyond all of that centrism.
Okay, thank you so much, Janie. That's a lot of food for thought for what do we take from our groups and from our wisdom traditions, and how do we leverage that for the common good at large, and how do we leave behind certain parts that might weigh us down. So yeah, Janie, that's a lot to think about. Thank you so much. Okay, Aglaya, over to you, and then Gary, then Ken, then David.
Hi. Okay, so first I'm gonna say I'm kind of having to go with Janie on this one though. Like, we go beyond those, like preliminary needs that are supposedly served by ethnocentrism. But the other thing though is that, okay, maybe it's just because of my own particular experiences though, but I've seen way too much in my life of the very negative sides of ethnocentrism and what it actually leads, it also tears like groups to like shreds basically, because at some point, okay, like I don't know, like if I'm gonna think of an example off the top of my head, okay, like this is gonna get me in trouble. I already know this is gonna get me in trouble, but here's an example. Okay, all right, so when you're dealing with, okay, how many people knew for years that R. Kelly was abusive? He had raped underage girls and everything. Okay, but if you had actually seen how many people ran to his defense, basically, and a lot of the people, a lot of the girls that he was abusing were young black girls. And how many people in black communities ran to defend this man, even though everyone knew he was, I mean, he was also sexually abusing young black boys. Okay, here's the thing though, but everybody runs to this man's defense. One of the reasons why, well, because of the fact that the idea is those that you're not supposed to basically get the media involved and get the police involved because he's a successful black man and this is going to be negative for the community and blah, blah, blah. Okay? But this man raped I don't know how many underage kids at the same time. And you can't just say, and so they threw actual black kids under the bus in order to support him. And so that's one of the reasons why I see ethnocentrism, and I just think of like examples like that. Now, I'm going to get in trouble for like bringing up that particular example, but I was just like, I remember just when I was a teenager myself, and like, and I was listening to the music, and then that the singer Aaliyah, who was married to him, and he snuck her out of, like, I think he took and used a fake ID. He's a grown man marrying a 15-year-old girl, and I remember being horrified by it then. Why wasn't he in jail for that? And no, they let him get away with it, and then he goes on and he molests hundreds of other kids. So, and a lot of it is you don't involve certain people in that kind of, so it can actually destroy groups, like just because of the fact that, you can talk about that with any group. Will you actually protect, throw the kids of this group under the bus to protect child molesters in the group? I mean, it happens in many groups all the time. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of see ethnocentrism that way a lot of the time.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I appreciate that example. And I think it's hard for non-minorities to understand the shame and fear that emerges when someone from one's group is portrayed in this way. Um, I don't know any Jews who defend Madoff and Epstein and these folks, but it certainly is painful and scary when we see these people, do these horrible things. And I can understand why people in the Black community, given the racial injustices and prejudices, would initially instinctively be concerned about such a portrayal. And I think that when Jews stand up against other Jews who have done terrible things, it makes Jews look good. And when black folks stand up against a rapist in the community, it makes black folks look good. And yet that fear is still there. And there are people in all these different minority communities that will naturally want to rise up to defend. And to be sure, I think we see it in gender as well. Men who naturally want to defend men and women who naturally want to defend women. Just the sense that their own gender is never wrong. I think it goes deep on so many fronts in religion and race and gender and the like, and it's worth us unpacking that and some of that psychology there. So thank you. Yes. Okay. All right. Over to Gary and then Ken, then David.
Well, I don't have anything as deep as all that, but Janie and Leah had to say. But I just find that human nature is that people like to be around people that they have things in common with, and then they pick up the ethnicity, or the values of that particular group. I think that's very, very comforting, and I think sometimes we forget that, because I have friends that say, "But you don't have any Christian friends," and I do. But the majority of my friends are Jewish because we have things in common, subliminally or otherwise, and it makes us feel comfortable. And so, nothing is deep, but just thought I'd say that. And I just want to say also, it's good to see Ken and Janie in person. We all live in Phoenix, but we don't always get a chance to see each other except on Zoom. So have a good day.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary. Okay, over to you, Ken, and then David, then Sarah.
Oh, wow, there's so much to this this topic. I have no doubt there are good things about ethnocentrism that makes you feel good about people in your community. But there seems to be far more, mistaken beliefs of either cultural or moral superiority or other superiority or even of purity that make absolutely no sense morally. And I think your discussion of intermarriage in at least modern or semi-modern Jewish life is an interesting one. I've often wondered why most Northern European Jews have pale skin. Because if we really were a people that had ethnic purity, we would look like Arabs. We would have dark skin. We would be the Semites that we are. And it seems like over the several thousands of years that we lived in Northern Europe, it's hard to believe that there was not a lot of interbreeding, and that there is not a lot of non-Semitic genetics to our people. So I think it's an interesting question as to how recently this concern with purity has existed in our people. But I do think that there's probably hardly any things that have caused more harms to the world than ethnocentrism and religious centrism. Most of our wars seem to have originated from those things, and the most horrible acts that we have perpetrated on each other have been because of those things. So on an ethical basis, I think the Tower of Babel was a terrible thing to have happened.
Thank you, Ken. Okay, very interesting. Okay, over to you, David.
Okay, hi everybody. Just two things. So I only know Valley Beit Midrash as a study group, but I am here in Phoenix for a couple months. So maybe I'll call the office and see what other things you all are doing. That would be a lot of fun. And then the other thing is that opening up with the text study, I'm starting to learn biblical Hebrew. So I looked up the word segula on Google, and it said chosen, but it also says treasured possession. So with that idea or that meaning, if it's true, what I'm thinking is that, it would be okay to say that not only I or my group, but all groups are God's treasured possession. That makes sense to me. And so, certainly in Judaism, there is both universalism and particularism. We're all made in God's image, humanism. That's a big part of Judaism, but also particularism. We all, those of us that are lucky enough to learn the history or go to Hebrew school. I mean, there's beauty in our own little culture. And then the last thing is that, one of the rabbis in St. Louis, in talking about, should he veer towards Unitarianism, embracing everything. And the reason he didn't do that, because he grew up as a secular Jewish guy, is that he said he wanted to plumb the depths of Judaism, of one, tradition. It would be too hard to do everything. And so that's the particularism, which has a beauty unto itself, as well as universalism. It's and. I mean, they're both beautiful. That's all.
Thank you. And David, I do hope you will start joining us at some of our social action now that we know you're sometimes local. So
Cool.
there's quite a bit. And yes, and on this point of treasured, the word in treasured for in Hebrew is segula. What is it? What color is that connected to? Sagol, purple. Because the royal or the kingly treasure is associated with the color purple. So kind of interesting that's, but yes, anyways, very interesting points. I was just throwing that random point in, but yes, Sarah, over to you.
Okay, well, I got interested particularly with Gary's saying that, part of the reason to be ethnocentric perhaps is that we feel more comfortable. And I think one of the invitations within Judaism is to not be comfortable, to actually, see the stranger and welcome the stranger. And the stranger is not someone necessarily within our own group. Otherwise, they wouldn't be a stranger. And so the invitation in our being chosen is to choose to be beyond how we, and perfect for this time of year, to be beyond our own pharaohs, our inner pharaohs and the outer pharaohs that hold us in this ethnocentric jail, and to be able to reach out and to see all others as part of who we are on this planet. I'm done.
Thank you. That is a great place to pause, to celebrate that we love the familiar. We love the people who are familiar to us, the tastes that are familiar to us, the comforts, and yet we're also challenged to go to the strange, to the different, that which does not feel familiar, that which smells different and looks different and walks different, and to approach that with curiosity and gentleness and compassion, rather than with an ethnocentric judgmentalism and exclusiveness or a purity mindset. So, in so many different ways, our psychological makeup is so different in terms of how we relate to these things, and each of us can personally reflect on the love of the familiar and the comfortable, and also where can we break through a little bit in our minds, that which requires a little bit more of a second look from us. Friends, next week, I can't believe we're moving to session 55 of 60, is the psychology of existentialism. The psychology of existentialism. We're going to go from the group to the individual. So I look forward to seeing you then and wish you all a beautiful day. Thank you so much for joining us.